All right, so we're back. Uh, One of the things that I think I want to try to make this car talk about is just about, I guess, history in general and how history works, why history is important, and does history matter at all to anything? Or is history just something, like that doesn't matter past a certain point in time? So, I was on Facebook the other day, and I don't use Facebook. Facebook isn't a go-to website or app that I regularly go to because I never believed in Facebook as a tool. I never thought that it was something that was necessary or needed. And where I had rejected it out of the gate many years ago when it first came out, because I'm of the age where, like, I've watched time pass and I've watched how things have progressed. And Facebook was just one of those things that I didn't agree with. Like, I didn't see it as what it was being made out to be. And I still don't believe it's anything. However, we live in a country where it's mob rule, and when it comes to mob rule, the consumer talks, right? But it's not necessarily the consumer that's talking, because, again, in my studies growing up in this country and going to school and getting educated, part of how the culture works at large is that you're usually force-fed like an animal, right? That needs to eat certain food because you're domesticated. And when you're domesticated like a cat or a dog, like the cat or the dog doesn't really have a choice in what its master feeds it, right? Like, basically, if you own a pet, you're going to feed the pet whatever you choose to feed it, and then that animal is going to have to eat it. Otherwise, they're not going to have any food to eat, right? Makes sense? Pretty easy to understand. Well, it's the same way with people and products and services to a certain extent. Now, the animals don't really have a free market. Supposedly, we have a free market, and our free market is supposed to allow us to have options and choices in which we can choose based on our preferences or based on our wants. We're able to decide to say yes to this and no to that. And so that's what the presumption is, that you have options when you live in America. However, those options are usually, predicated on money and how much money you have. And so the way people make money, that's a whole other topic and issue, is going to foster just what's the type of stuff that you can consume. Now, there is a part of the market that says, but you don't have a choice. Like, you won't be recognized as being part of the social class unless you have these things. And that's led to a lot of social issues, individualism being brought in and then being used as a tool to say, certain issues are predicated on the fact that if somebody doesn't have this, then it's like an assault on their person or an assault on their individuality. point in case, like, I've never heard of homosexuals come out and say that they need the right to have internet access, or they need the right to have cell phones, because they're marginalized, because a lot of homosexuals don't have cell phones, or that they don't have access to internet, and so this is a problem for their community. Now, other groups have said that, and this is where you see the separation, and then you find the layers that exist in the society on how people are arguing about what is needed and what is required. Otherwise, there's a backlash, or there's some kind of outrage, or there's some type of reaction to the fact that they'll say, well, this is a targeted effort, right? So with the free market, it's kind of like, well, if is it a free market or is it not a free market? And the groups that are saying they're marginalized, or that they're targeted, or that they don't have free access, or they don't have enough access, like, what is it that they're being, given or not given, that's giving them power within the system to then say, do you have enough power now? Like, is this now enough for you, or do you need more? Because I've never understood that as a person. And I myself, I've said it on other car talks, I'm an individual. Everybody's an individual, But it's, how do you identify as that individual that in the end, what are you really saying? Because for some people, do I need a luxury car? No, I don't need a luxury car. I don't need a high-end luxury vehicle in order for me to live my day-to-day life. And yet, some groups and some people and individuals will say it's an absolute necessity, and that they're willing to do whatever it takes, right? They'll go to whatever extremes necessary in order to get that luxury car or that luxury item. That it's a necessity. It's not a want, it's a necessity. And now, there's plenty of people that will say, I don't need this, I don't need that, I don't need this, I don't need that, I don't need this, I don't need that, so on and so forth, and that could go on for forever. So, from a historical standpoint, most Americans understood what was needed, right? And then what's a want. Like, that in the 1900s was understood until it became political. And then when the politics took over, that's when you saw, like, the grabbing of power and then reaching for ideologies that, it was no longer individualism. They morphed it, or they would change it into socialism or communism. And so that's why you see, like, when you're talking about America and you're talking about, what is America as a country? Like, what is it supposed to be? Like, how is it represented from a citizen standpoint, let's say? How do people identify with the system that's in place? Because over the years they said, well, we're turning into a communist country, we're turning into a socialist country. Well, but if we were not supposed to be socialist or communist, like, what were we supposed to be? Because if you say a democracy is mob rule. And so this is kind of the audible, the audible that's basically being called out, that's been called out, that started around the 2000s. And that's where Facebook, like, came into the picture. around 2000. And that's when, that football got, passed to this ideology that said, well, once that started up, that kicked off individualism, like on a technological level. And when that happened, that's when you heard all of the talk of socialism and communism coming into being or becoming more prevalent within the society. And that's when you saw the attacks and the declines of nations. That's when you saw corporations start to take over, systems, and then all of a sudden it was like there's a kind of side by side where corporatism was the other main system of governance. Like who you worked for, the company you worked for made like some big kind of I don't want to say impression, but it was supposed to mean something. That it wasn't your work as a professional and how you conducted yourself in the work environment. It was who were you doing work for that made some kind of an impression. I'll use the word impression on people when you were telling them either what you did for a living or who you did it for. And then this whole idea of saying that was a good company that you work for. And that was all through brand recognition. So you could work for a small company that nobody heard of. The company could be a great company. It could be one where people are working professionally and, conducting themselves ethically and, providing a good service to a customer or customers, right? But you didn't have the brand recognition. This is kind of like, if you've ever worked in the retail trade, this is kind of Whole Foods kind of brand image when it comes to the products that they carry. Because what they'll say, the product, or when selling it, they'll say it's not a lot of brand recognition. They don't spend a lot of time advertising their products because that creates a budget. And, so many companies spend so much money in their budget just for marketing their brand or their company name. So when you go to a big box store, those, making the distinction between a non-marketed item that has quality ingredients, is produced ethically, environmentally friendly, all of this kind of stuff, non-GMO, organic, right? Well, they would say that the product is better product, it's better quality, and that the free market competitor is one that focuses on advertising and making sure that the people are bombarded by advertisement and that they're constantly seeing the ads on TV, on the internet, billboards, flyers, advertisements, right? The way that marketing works, right? And so those companies that spend the money on the marketing, those are the ones that essentially were known to be like good companies. Now you have larger companies, let's say like a Google, that in the end, how many people can go and work for Google if you're not in technology? Well, if you're not in technology, how can you go work for Google? It's a technology company. So how are you going to work for them if you're a blue-collar worker? Right? Well, chances are, unless you're cleaning up their office, and I don't see why Google would have their own, cleaning service. I would guess that they're going to hire out, although probably with their with all their secrets and all of this, they probably have their own, they probably do have their own cleaning service that comes in and takes care of their offices. The point being is that, you know, when you're looking at history and you're looking at these changes in our society, how is it that we can identify as people and understand how are we free? How are we free? Are we free through our jobs? Are we free because we're Americans? Are we free because we have money in our pocket? Are we free because of the principles that we live by? Like, what constitutes being free? And so these types of things, they have to be talked about. They have to be talked about, because the further and further that we keep going into individualism, like, it's going to lead to history repeating itself. And history repeats itself in a power vacuum. And that power vacuum is going to be one where it's going to have so much detailed information, so much history recorded down because of websites like Facebook, that there's not going to be a way to go back and say that we don't have records, that we don't have, profiles, that we don't have, the only thing we could say is we don't know who was working for these companies when they were working for the companies. So it's kind of like a faceless, managers or faceless companies that in the end they say, well, the companies are people, right? Corporations are people. Well, they may be people, but who knows who these people are and what they're about, or what they're about, and like, what is it that they believe in? Because, again, in the past, the blue collar worker was kind of like the everyday person that, commuted to work, had to go and punch a time clock and show up and do a job. And in this day and age, that's not really what the case is. That's not how things work, due to computers and internet access and cameras and all this other stuff working remote. And that goes across industries. That goes across a lot of industries: medical, educational, technological, finance. Like, people don't really go into an office, right? Ever since 2020, when 2020 hit, that created this utopia for individualism, where it basically shattered the entire world economy. And in America in particular, like, those services that were seen as essential worked through that whole 2020 process, that whole 2020 time period. And there was people that got a lot of vacation time. Whether they like to believe it or understand it or not, a lot of people took time off, vacation, or took it as a vacation, because at some point they weren't working. Because they were told, hey, you're not essential. You're not going to be going to work. And so there was a massive, like, worldwide vacation where the people, I see it as like, people got time off from work. And I mean a lot of people, millions and millions and millions of people. And we're not talking like a 3-day weekend. We're talking like a year to 2 years of not working. And fundamentally, it was like in the society itself, unless you were an essential worker. And so part of the divide that you see in 2024, I think part of it has to do with people that were in the labor market, because essentially you have your retirees. The retirees is the other segment, or the other part of the culture that nobody's really talking about. They don't understand retirement, because retirement leads to a whole other aspect of our society that people don't get. They've never been told what it's like to be retired, or what do you do with your life when you're retired, or what do all these millions of people, like what percentage of the American population is considered retired? Like, how many millions of people? It's got to be a couple million. If they had a few million people come across the border illegally, or however you want to look at it, saying that these people crossed the border as migrants or immigrants or whatever, well, they came to work. They weren't coming over as retirees. It's not like you had all these retirees down in Mexico or throughout the world that were like, this is a perfect time for us to go to America and to retire, because we got nothing else to do. And so these are things that need to be talked about on a present day level. Like, it needs to be discussed. It needs to be talked about in a current events, like in a sociology. I was having a problem a few card talks back figuring out the word. I kept saying socialist, but it's not socialist. It's sociologist is what it is. Sociologists study the social sciences. So it has to do with people, and it has to do with, how people interact, how communities work, how they function. But as you get to the higher levels, you're talking about economies, you're talking about corporations, you're talking about business, things like that, the labor market. And so there's a hierarchy that it starts from the individual, but, how the individual moves through the different populace is, what shapes the culture at large. And so there's a lot of people that just, they don't understand these things. The young people don't even care, because they've put their lives on technology. They put their lives, their physical lives have been transferred over like a file to the technology world. So now all you really have is a person's timeline history online, because nobody cares about you as a person. If they don't look at your Facebook page, what do they know about you? And yet if somebody knows you and they look at your Facebook page and they look at your timeline, they know probably more stuff about you than you know about yourself, just based on your friends and your relations and everything that you've ever put on the timeline. And so, it needs to be discussed, because there's some people that stayed offline. I stayed offline. I did not want to have all my personal private information online. I didn't want to have to be living my life with people being able to see every little, nook and cranny of my life, because I'm a private person. That's one of the things. Like, do you believe in private property? Do you believe in, as an individual, that there's things that should be private, that it's none of your business? And yet people as individuals, and I'm saying a lot of individuals here, they put everything about their lives online. And that leads to a democracy in attitude and in societal formation, because what they're saying is there's so many people that believe in putting their information online and having all their data online. And if you're a person that never believed in it in the first place, well, then you have to go by the mob. You have to go and be controlled by the mob, because the mob knows what it's doing. And I just don't believe in that. I think that belief and that practice leads to people that don't know history, because if just putting all this history online, they're not reading anything about history. And they're not able to interact with people. That's why there's so many individualists, like, in the society, because they don't know how to interact with people. That's why they go online to find their technology family online, to find their community online, because they don't live in your community. They don't live in your state. They don't live on your coast. They don't live in your region. And so you have all these people that are reaching to try to connect with people, and at this point you don't have a choice, because you've had this mutation that has formed within, the populace, where now it's like you're part technology and part person, unless you never fused yourself to technology in the first place. And so it gets to the point where it's like, well, how do you go about, finding your place in the world when so many people have given themselves over to this, Facebook lifestyle, where you're supposed to just agree with it, and now if you're not on Facebook, well, then you're a pariah. You know what I mean? You're taboo, because everybody has done it. Like, everybody took the vaccine, right? If you didn't take the vaccine, then there's something wrong with you. And it's this attitude that people, they don't get. They fundamentally just don't understand, what type of a consequence it has to societies, because they don't look at the big picture. They don't look at, they're not looking at visions, and they're not understanding, things where people that have wealth, money, and power, when they're trying to control systems, when they're trying to control societies and civilizations, because again, they have the money, the wealth, the power to do so, like, they don't understand as individuals, like, they're nothing. They're nothing in the big picture. About all they're doing is they're creating waves. And they're creating waves around the people around them. Not a ripple. It's not a ripple. It's, they've created waves that at this point in society, to try to figure out, like, you need to know how to swim, first of all. And if you don't know how to swim, like, what happens at a point is that there's a turn of events, or there's something that happens. It's just what happens in history. In history, there's a point where something turns, and when that happens, people aren't prepared for it. Like, you could say you weren't prepared for 2020, right? And when I say 2020, like, you're either thinking one of two things. Well, he's talking about the election. That's one thing, because 2020 was the election. But 2020 was also the pandemic. So if you're listening to this and you actually got this far to listen to this point, what do you think I was talking about when I say 2020? What comes to mind first? Do the 2020 elections come first to you in your mind? Or does the pandemic come to you first in your mind? And this is the split. This is where some of this stuff, again, it gets deep. It gets deep, and if you don't understand, this cuts to the core of a person's being with their identity. And if they don't understand these things, because you've never gone through this type of event, or you've never gone through this type of a phenomenon, then you're going to be caught off guard when you see a turn of events take place, because you're going to see something shift, and you're not going to know, how to walk on the ship, because you're going to be like, whoa, I've never been on a ship before, and now I'm getting seasick, right? Or you've never been on a plane before, and you're like, now I'm getting airsick. That's the type of stuff that happens in history, where people, they're not paying attention. And when they don't pay attention, and when you don't have good people able to communicate, to give a heads up on things, people are not going to expect it. And that's a problem, because that's never really happened in this country before. Because this country, it's only been around for so many years that it's like it hasn't gone through this major turn of events to have to live through it to then say, oh man, like, what happened to this country? And if you say that you don't know what's going on, well then, how many years have you been spending your life recording your timeline, your history online? That you're saying you weren't paying attention? Like, what were you paying attention to? Like, at what point are you paying too much attention to the inside and not paying enough to the outside? And so, it's going to be interesting. the last few years of the 20s, I believe, based on, what happens with this election in 2024. We'll see what happens. But, I can only hope that people, people that have heart, people that have intelligence, people that have compassion, that are able to understand what life is and what life means. Because I think for those people that are all devoted to technology, or that are all about, thinking technology is the end all to be all, I think they're going to find out that there's more to life than, individualism, and then saying what you need as an individual versus what do you need as a civilization, or as a, from a society. Like, what should you expect? And that's going to be impactful. That's going to be major. You know what I mean? That's not going to be little crumbs. That's going to be big meals to have to try to digest and to try to figure out. And if you're not old enough to have that food, because you're still eating baby food, because you're still a baby and you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, you're in your 60s, and you're still eating baby food, you're in your 70s. Well, in your 70s, maybe you start eating baby food. In your 80s, maybe that's all that you can eat in your 80s is baby food, because your body can't handle it. Your digestive system can't handle it. So if we don't find where the adults are, and hopefully the adults that are responsible, and the adults that can be given responsibility, because at this point, looking at what has happened, like, it's been pretty irresponsible. And the only thing that people think is that consumerism is their gravy boat. And they think that, the food is going to get better and better and better for them. And for some of us, we found out, like, we've been doing a lot of work, and yet when we got to the table, there's no one saved any food. There's no bread left. There's no mashed potatoes. The gravy, there's a little bit of gravy left. What are you supposed to put the gravy on? There's no meatloaf. There's no turkey. There's no ham. Like, the Thanksgiving, it's like, Thanksgiving, there's nothing on the Thanksgiving table. There's nothing here for people to be thankful for. And that's difficult. And, thankfully, I've grown up in this country to know what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about. So I'm not bitter about it. I'm not upset. I mean, I know, because I grew up in the 80s, and I know how tough it was in the 80s if you grew up in the 80s. The 60s, the 70s, those were tough times, man. Economically, they were tough times. But yet, it's like people, they have loss of memory. It's like people in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, like their memory doesn't go that far back. They can't recall those memories. Either that, or they decided to forget them a long time ago, and they think that those memories don't matter, or that history in itself, it has no meaning. There's no purpose to remember things. And I just happen to be one of those people that, I like history, and I believe in history, and I've always liked to understand history. And so it's one of those things that it's like, growing up in the 1900s, in that late quarter century, that, again, some of this stuff makes sense, and people need to wake up to it. They need to wake up to it. Otherwise, again, history has a way of repeating itself, and it'll be in a different form, with technology and all of that, but it'll repeat itself in a way that says, people never pay attention. They're not paying attention. Just like in a classroom, like a bunch of elementary school kids, you're not paying attention. And so I'm going to leave it at that. This one kind of went a little longer. I usually try to keep it, under half hour. I'm going to try to see if I could do some like smaller bit ones, maybe like 10, 15 minutes. I want to try to keep it shorter. Maybe someone will be better to digest it. It's just sometimes I'm not talking about things so specifically. And so it sounds like I'm rambling, but there's so much there, and I'm going to see if I can connect these things later on once I've had time, because this is hopefully a long-term project. I'm not trying to do it as a short-term project. I'm trying to do it as a long-term project. And so hopefully things will make sense over time. And depending on when you jump on it, like a wave, if you ever done any surfing, you got to wait for the wave. And then if you know how to surf, I don't know if you know how to surf. If you don't know how to surf, then you're missing out, because either that or go do bodyboarding and see what that's like. Because if you've never been out in the ocean, or if you've never swam in the ocean, you're missing out. You're missing out. Or if you don't know how to swim, I feel sorry for you, because swimming is one of the most beautiful things a person can learn how to do. And to go do it out in the ocean, is amazing. If you grow up on an island and you know what the ocean is like, the beauty and the majesty of the ocean, because it's dangerous out there. There's things out in the ocean, and you could get hurt out there if you're not careful. But yeah, on the land, it works the same way too. But people like to feel safe on the land. They always think they're safe on the land, but it's dangerous on the land too. So you got to learn how to understand beauty and majesty, and you got to look for the truth. You got to look for the truth to find what's so great about the truth. Otherwise, if you're stuck in individualism and you're just doing your own thing, and you're always looking introvertedly at yourself and at your own personal life, and you're not looking out to see what's going on outside, I don't know what to tell you. You're probably not alive, or you're missing a part of your life. It's going to catch up with you at some point, and then you're going to find out you feel hollow, or you feel like something's missing and you don't know what it is. And society might not be ready at that time to give you any of that information back, because they're going to say, nah, you missed the boat on the time when you should have been reflecting on things that were going on. And now you're not going to have that time. It's not going to be the time to look for that stuff now. So anyway, that's all I got. The weekend's here. Try to enjoy yourself. If you're listening to this on the weekend, good morning, good night, good evening to anyone that's listening that's in those time frames. And if you're listening worldwide, if you happen to be listening, awesome for you. Subscribe if you think that this is content that's worth listening to. Again, it's a bit of a ramble, but it's good stuff. I think it's good stuff. It's real stuff. I'm a real person, and I'm just trying to get things out there and get people to understand that there's still real people on the planet left, and that we're still here. We didn't disappear. And so don't lose heart. If you ever feel lonely, just know that there's real people. There's real people out there, and leave a comment, like and subscribe. I got to say that because people have been saying that themselves. So that way I can grow the channel. Maybe I'll get 2 views on a video, and I'll be real happy about that. Anyway, that's all I got. You have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.